Welcome to DevOps Accents, a podcast on everything around DevOps, public cloud, and cloud-native topics, with your hosts, Pablo, Leo, and Kirill.
Hello and welcome to another episode of DevOps Accent, a podcast where we, the co-founders of mkdev, get together to discuss all things around DevOps and cloud-native technologies. And today we have decided to invite another guest, a good friend of ours. It's David Sandilands. Hi, David.
Hi, Leonard. How you doing?
I'm good. Thank you. So today, Pablo and Kirill with us today, and I want to give a short introduction to David. So he is a principal solution architect at Puppet by Perforce, where he focused on product management of Puppet's development ecosystem and integration. He spent decades helping to evolve traditional DevOps working environment, and he is an author of Puppet 8 for DevOps engineers. So I believe you will be interested to read this, and we have the link to this book in the description. Go and check it now. No, not now. You should first finish listening the podcast because we are going to discuss Puppet. So, David, what's your accent?
Well, my accent's Scottish. I'm based here in Falkirk, the home of the largest horse statues in the world and the only rotating boat wheel. My general background is, the decade you mentioned, I spent kind of modernizing DevOps in traditional backgrounds was mainly in finance at the Royal Bank of Scotland, which was later renamed to NatWest Bank, where they went from a very traditional, literally kind of having Excel spreadsheets of commands to set up servers, to having a modern IaaS platform where people self-serviced and ordered Unix and Windows and Linux hosts, kind of fully configured with applications on top. And kind of following on from that, as a result of doing that work, I joined Puppet to initially work as a solutions architect, where I basically took a lot of those lessons I learned on that journey and worked with the kind of largest, most complex customers on how they could make that similar journey before going into the product side to help the development of our developer ecosystem, with that kind of understanding of how customers were using it.
That's a bit more extensive answer than I expected. Okay. First, I want to say that do people even offended if people confuse Scottish and Northern England accents in general?
Well, I mean, I guess I wouldn't, and I guess the other thing is I have a relatively soft accent anyway, because I think if we went into deepest, darkest Glasgow and brought somebody on, you would have a lot harder job understanding them compared to my accent, which is kind of a mix of central Scotland and my mother's side from Gloucester in England. But I mean, I think that there is a kind of close relation, between the north of England and Scotland. My wife is ironically from Middlesbrough in the north of England, so I think obviously locals always say they sound completely different, but it,
Yeah. Anyway, I adore you. I adore how it sounds. So it is nice to have you. So this is another accent in our collection of DevOps accents. Tell us more how you end up being in the DevOps industry in general. Like you started in a different direction and then you switched to that. How did this happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was made to feel very old recently because somebody mentioned that somebody was very old school because they had done Solaris and AIX in the past. And I had to then ask, did they do HPUX as well? Because that's where I started. So, yeah, I mean, I started in a very, very traditional environment in, as I said, the Royal Bank of Scotland, doing kind of Unix administration. Mm-hmm. I think as the DevOps movement, went through more traditional companies. So I went through, more innovative companies, the traditional companies like banking who were, getting a lot of growth from, internet banking and a lot of things we just take for granted now. there was just no way for them to scale, particularly with all the compliance rules that came in at the same kind of time. So at that point, they were forced away from a very traditional heavy approach, and they had to start adopting DevOps. So, having worked in kind of more traditional kind of shell scripts and things like that, I was then kind of, invited to learn technologies like Puppet. I mean, it sounds strange saying it now, but things like Git and things like that were not very native in these organizations. A lot of things we take purely for granted now were very new and had to be learned and applied, in these organizations. So it kind of built up from that. And, it was just kind of taking it piece by piece and, in my case, moving from like a build cycle that was, it took 2 years almost to get a Linux build out, believe it or not. And then it went down to 6 months, and then it went down to 2 weeks. So it was just kind of slow evolution, really.
To me, when you speak Puppet and you say Puppet, to me this sounds like I didn't hear this term and this name like for quite long, and to me this draws me back to history of mkdev when we been developing the company. Kirill, do you remember that? Like you even created a number of articles on this tool, and one of our most watchable video is about Puppet and what is configuration management is in general. But later, this kind of disappeared from my point of view. And what the story here? Kirill, I wanted you to give your impression, because this was you who was writing the articles and making those videos on this, and how it was back then. Was it like the part of DevOps, but then and then it switched to kind of entirely different technologies? And or it's like just my impression, and in reality it's entirely different.
I think in terms of DevOps, I always say that there is like this term means whatever you want it to mean, because it's a profession, it's a culture, it's a set of technologies, and it evolves all the time. And by now, DevOps as a word means more or less nothing. Like we use it like we are DevOps consulting, but we mean by it that we help companies with certain technologies and approaches. And when I started with DevOps, because I personally have been a backend developer, and then it so happened that I was in a team that used Chef heavily. And I just learned Chef because it was Ruby company, and then Chef is Ruby, same as Puppet. And at that point in time, that was 2014, 13, when I got into Chef. And that's what DevOps was about at that point. That when you were talking about DevOps, it often meant that you automate infrastructure with configuration management, and you don't script stuff. And that's also when like the cloud started growing and growing. And then the best way to automate lots of machines was to use something like Puppet or Chef. And really for this period of time, for maybe like 5 years more, because Puppet is like from 2005, I used it seriously like on the bigger projects for maybe 3 years, up till 2018 last time. For a long time, for me mentally, DevOps was like inseparable from configuration management tools. That's also why we have articles on this, because at that point in time, my career was around configuration management and infrastructure automation. Mm-hmm. And we have the video on configuration management. We have an article about this. We never had an article, it's only the video. It was like a series of articles on DevOps in general, ending with network, and then there is a video of configuration management. And it's interesting to see how it evolved, because I personally didn't use configuration management much in the last 4 or 5 years. Could be because of the nature of the projects I'm involved, because it's more about Terraform, cloud infrastructure on AWS, and customers I work with rarely configure machines, or maybe they have some like EC2 instance somewhere that they configure with some shell script or a imperative Ansible playbook. But kind of conf management at scale, like the proper conf management, went into the background for me personally. And also in the job descriptions recently, just when we look for projects and customers, in description it's Chef and Puppet and SaltStack and even Ansible are not so often to be seen. And now DevOps engineer is someone who knows how to use Amazon Terraform and set up a pipeline, roughly speaking.
Yeah. When you joined the Puppet, was it your decision, like, that did you want to join them, or was it more like a general job search? Like, what the story? How did you end up in Puppet and being like a crucial member of the development team of the product?
Yeah, I mean, I always try to kind of keep a lookout at companies that, I would like to potentially work for to see what roles are coming out, because you've always got that challenge of you can never quite know when something's actually going to be free, and so sometimes opportunities happen at awkward times. So my wife was pregnant at the point I was moving to Puppet, so it wasn't necessarily the best time to make a job move and have a second child. And then start a book shortly after that as well. But it was kind of a rare job opportunity that came up in Puppet. They didn't have many solutions architects in Europe at that point. There was only kind of the three of us when I joined on. So yeah, it was something I'd actively looked for. I think the culture changed a bit as well, because if you go far enough back, Puppet was mainly kind of in Portland and very America focused in terms of its staffing. Whereas by the time I was joining at that point, I was joining during COVID, and things had gone much more remote. And if you actually kind of look at kind of Puppet's breakdown now, I think the last figure I heard was kind of 60-70% of the staff are kind of remote now. So, again, that change of how a lot of technology companies work, helped me be able to apply in that kind of job. Because historically, I'd have been in central Scotland, and it's kind of insurance, banks, media, but not much of that kind of tech company.
I have a question, David, because for me, it's super interesting. When you start to use Puppet many years ago, like for me, in my case, I started in 2010, 11. And I remember, we were talking about that the day that we met. I remember how it was Puppet, because Puppet was this magical tool that it was able to do everything. Because before, when you wanted to do an installation, you had to go machine by machine. You need to do the installation of this machine. You had to go to, okay, now it's the network. I need to go to the network. I want to create a user in this machine. I want to do the installation of this packet. You had to do thousands of things. Every time that you were in a data center and you have to install a new machine or something happened, it was a nightmare. It was hours and hours of work. And then Puppet appeared. And when Puppet appeared, it was the magic was there. Because maybe for the people who never, for the old guys, we know how hard it was to do the things. But maybe for the new people, they think that everything is like it's today, with internet and with all these things. But it was different. And then the thing is, how is Puppet today? Because Puppet it was something so marvelous. But how is Puppet in 2024? We can say now. What is the difference between this Puppet in 2010 and the Puppet that currently we have in 2014?
From my own experience, it was exactly that kind of thing where, as I said, I was a Unix system administrator, and, the whole build process was, somebody would get their instructions for how a host should be set up. They would slowly go through that process. They'd pass it on to an application team. That application team would do something similar. It would come back to the support team, who would have to kind of sign off that box was fit for production. And quite often it wasn't, because, nothing was keeping things in line or in enforcement. So then it would have to keep being bounced about teams, and it could, I saw some boxes it took 6 months to be allowed into production. So when you compare that to the expectations of what people would have today in terms of how quickly they expect to be able to get a virtual machine, it's just completely different and mind-boggling. And I think as well, Puppet at that kind of point was very developer focused. So typically you'd have a lot of people who were Ruby developers who would use Puppet.
Yeah.
And who would use tools very, very natively. And a lot of those kind of splits that happened, in terms of like Puppet and Chef, SaltStack, Ansible, a lot of those kind of splits were quite interesting because, when it was starting out, there was a lot of debates about how things should be. So one of the kind of most controversial ones was around ordering of resources in Puppet. So when you were declaring, I need this user with these parameters and this package with these parameters. There was a huge debate, where Puppet and Luke's view was because you shouldn't care about any dependencies unless you declare them. In theory, that could happen, in any order. And that kind of meant that, like, if I ran it on one server in dev, it might run completely different in production. So obviously people didn't like that, and that caused one of the splits. And there was other things like that. In terms of Chef was quite kind of about being able to do more extensive Ruby language, so that kind of split off. And when you come to today, a lot of these things have matured. So Puppet now has a kind of what we call manifest ordering. So if there's no dependencies declared, it will run in the order you declare things in a file, and that's better consistency, obviously. But there's quite a lot of things like that, because if you go back that far as well, there was no data types originally in Puppet.
Yeah.
So there's quite an entertaining YouTube video where I think it's from 2011, 2012, where somebody's kind of going, "What do you think happens if you add this string to a number?" And says, "And what happens if I reverse it?" And you got quite strange results because you didn't have predictable data types and kind of what you'd kind of take for granted in more mature languages. So when you come to today, that's what you tend to find. A lot of these things have been settled. We have strict data types. Puppet also has a lot of tooling. Obviously I'm a product manager for the development tools. So we have things like Puppet Development Kit, which allow people not to have to kind of manage Ruby gems and the linting and testing fully themselves. They're able to run commands through the PDK to kind of automate those steps and kind of focus down on just kind of declaring the Puppet language.
Because even I have to remind that these days the business is not there is a business in the cloud, but I have to remind you that most of the business is still in the data center, no? Because still there is a need to have a place where the machines are located. There is this need, no?
Yeah, well, I mean, we're currently running our State of DevOps report for platform engineering. So I have 829 pages of data to peruse through.
Wow.
And one of the most interesting things for me was when it was talking about percentages of technical products used. Kubernetes was 29% of platforms had Kubernetes. Mm-hmm. And, I also kind of said, I think it was 49% were not considering Kubernetes at this time for any of their platforms. So I think what you see is like a lot of technology companies, there's obviously a big growth in Kubernetes. So there's a lot of technology products focused on it. There's a lot of jobs focused on it. But, the VMs kind of aren't really going anywhere. They're still kind of slowly growing in the background, but there's a lot of them. So one of the big changes Puppet's seen is, one of the big focuses for us now, as opposed to kind of lots of big changes in the language, it's more about size and complexity and amount of data. So we're now seeing kind of 150,000 node enterprise setups. And we have had some customers and big technology firms ask us about, could we reach a 1 million node setup? And that's where it gets interesting for us, because it's working on a much bigger scale than if we went kind of 5-10 years ago, and with expectations of VMs being able to be built and rebuilt constantly. Yeah. Whereas a lot of the time they would have been much more long lived in the past.
This is kind of sounds shocking to me, because from how you describe it, I started getting an impression that we, three of us, live in some kind of bubble where everybody knows and everybody uses Kubernetes, and everybody knows what is CI/CDs and how to utilize it for the best of their companies. But now you say that there are a majority of companies who do not even know or don't even use this kind of tools, and they live basically in a different era. And who are these companies? Like why this happens and why they didn't embrace the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think what tends to happen is you always have kind of cutting edge technology firms, right? Everyone gives the examples. Your Netflixes, Amazon, even things like in the UK, Gov UK have quite advanced digital portals, and they tend to have more freedom to kind of make these big decisions and make these big moves, and also they tend to be able to pull in staff a lot quicker and train a lot quicker. Whereas if you take other kind of larger firms, your big banks, insurance firms, big government, more traditional government than kind of, front digital, you then tend to have a bit more inertia. Because it probably shocked you at the kind of point that how long it took someone like the Royal Bank of Scotland to actually kind of fully adopt VMware, because it would seem awfully late to be saying in 2007 I was kind of trying to manage the number of physical servers down that they were deploying. And, so it tends to be kind of quite a long tail as to, when the changes are happening at the front with the more agile, nimble technology companies reach the bigger, more traditional firms. And then it just takes them time to kind of absorb those skills and work out how to run it with their processes. Because a lot of them have quite complex ITSM processes in terms of change and incident, and it's not easy to kind of work out operationally how to run these things, as technology firms tend to have more flexibility with how they do these things.
So basically what you are saying is that the companies who are tied with, with regulations, some kind, and for them it's difficult to adopt new technologies, and what they use in 2005, or 2010, is the same tool that they're using today, because in order for them to switch to something new and different, they have to change all their protocols or something like that. Is that the kind of companies?
Yeah, exactly. And there's also a skill element in it as well, because, I think we already know, getting kind of experienced Kubernetes operators is hard. And, these organizations, if they are to commit to something like, if they want to make, seriously invest in Kubernetes, the scale they work at will mean it will be very big. So they need to know that they can staff it and have the experience in dealing with it. And if we're honest, I think it can be quite surprising to people. Banks in IT terms are not high-paying places, for example. So a lot of these places also struggle to kind of keep track of high-demand skills. So it can be very hard to make those kind of moves when things are still kind of very rapidly growing and very hot. It doesn't mean they don't. Because they obviously have cutting edge things in terms of, a lot of their kind of, particularly in investment banking and, share trading and things like that, they will have those cutting edge things, and they will have the need to hire those people and have it on a smaller scale. In the same way, as I mentioned, UK government obviously have their digital platform, which is, probably very far ahead of what other kind of sections of UK government are doing. But, to have it across the general area of these big organizations, there's probably just not enough people who know Kubernetes on earth to even do it. And it takes time to skill up the people they have.
Mm-hmm. But I don't think that Perforce acquired Puppet for the sole reason to be able to offer solutions to the company that's stuck in the past. I assume there is definitely cases, on modern cases and cutting edge cases, where the Puppet offers to the modern company something. Can you tell what is your current and most, I'm not saying common case, but what you offer for the market as a modern tool, so to say?
Yeah, I mean, the key thing we have is that, a huge focus has gone on compliance. You mentioned earlier about people going into the cloud and having some EC2 and just having some scripts.
Yes.
That often, it's almost repeating what happened in the past, in terms of people come up and think, I won't have too much of this because it's all going to be Kubernetes is all going to be serverless. But a lot of people have found that actually serverless and Kubernetes is not necessarily cost effective for them. So sometimes they drop back to EC2 and
Kirill notes.
yeah, well, and that's the thing, is that sometimes it drops back to that. So we are seeing customers who are, working out their balance between private data center and public cloud, and making sure that they, one of Puppet's more recent developments is its compliance enforcement modules and Comply, which is a CIS scanner wrapped up. For those who are not familiar, CIS is a security standard which sets out, how Unix and Windows boxes should be configured, and it has kind of close ties with things like PCI and other kind of major government and financial standards. And that way, organizations who don't want to do a lot of Puppet work, but can just basically consume Comply and the modules and kind of get that enforcement. We also kind of have configuration for, allowing you to configure your Kubernetes cluster to our kind of accredited module, so that, somebody who's hosting Kubernetes in-house can, run the install and configuration of Kubernetes from Puppet's Kubernetes module. And I guess, some people as well are also using it within their pipelines. Because, we've spoken to people in terms of their platforms, they find a need to have a declarative language, inside their CI/CD pipelines. So, they find Puppet without the infrastructure useful in those kind of cases too.
There are no challenges that we couldn't overcome. Whether it is immediate infrastructure problems or planning a future project, we won't simply answer your questions. We become a part of your team to help you complete the mission. Our solutions consider the interests of your business and the combined expertise of the industry, as our staff is made up of more than a dozen experts in different areas who share decades of field-tested experience and knowledge with you.
And one question now, David, because we are living now in this moment where everything is with AI. Even to know that when you take a coffee with AI, it's more tasty than when you take a coffee without AI. So how is working Puppet that? Because the way that Puppet is working is, there should be some points when you can introduce AI, but that could appear wherever another company in the market who says, I'm doing that with AI, and maybe it's a copy paste of Puppet. Imagine, it's not like that, but we have AI inside. And there are many people who is going to say, wow, AI here, but this must be much better because it's intelligent. So how is dealing with AI Puppet? What is doing at this moment?
I think the trouble with the AI, I guess, is that there's a lot of hype around AI and there's a lot of desire to use it. So I'd say at this point we're working out the best ways to use it. What we're particularly interested in is that because of the way Puppet is structured, and it is an agent structure pulling back data into PuppetDB, which is our database, customers often end up with a lot of data. They have a lot of events about what code's been applied, things that have been corrected if they haven't been found in the right state. So I think customers struggle to evaluate all that data. So from my point of view, I'd be quite interested in how we can use AI well to evaluate that data and kind of make that kind of interpretation of, well, actually, when we've seen these sort of events happen before, that's potentially a sign of a security incident, or it's potentially a sign of where we've had incidents or issues or performance issues before. Because I think that's where AI, really comes into its own, is where, you have a lot of data and it's just not humanely possible to handle it all. And I think as well in terms of kind of code generation and Puppet code generation, it's something, my development teams are looking at how best to have it advised without people kind of just copy and pasting as gospel. Because I think, we've probably all seen bad things that have just been taken as correct from AI. I was informed my team Aberdeen had won the 1992 Scottish Cup, which I was totally unaware of since it hadn't actually happened. But it's just trying to work out how we train and how we make it reduce toil on customers, but have them understand that the information can only be so certain.
Yeah, because there are many CEOs these days that we know that They know that they need to use AI, but they don't know where. But they need to use AI.
Yeah. No, absolutely, and we're very aware of it, and we've had a lot of hackathons and things like that go on, and we have various AI tools that we're kind of testing out and working out what gives customers the best experience, and also works with some of our more secure customers, because obviously there's customers who have concern that if they're trying to work out is this Puppet code and this data valid, they don't want to think that they've sent data that is secure to the company out to the internet and it's being processed somewhere it could potentially be saved.
Yeah.
So we have to kind of work out how to balance that security of data with actually helping them understand their own data.
Yes.
Yeah, I think Puppet in a good position because you collect lots of data about the systems with the Puppet reports, especially in the environment with, like, as you say, 150K of nodes. You have 150K Puppet reports about every little detail about every host. So that's a lot to work with in terms of AI. Even with simple, God forbid, ChatGPT-like features with querying this kind of information is already huge training data set.
Absolutely, and that's we have like the Puppet query language, which helps you query PuppetDB, but there's always been a problem for users as to we know when users have big data sets, they struggle to think about where to focus and how to spot patterns, and that's definitely where AI shines out as being able to overcome those kind of hurdles.
There was like a story when OpenAI trained the data from the open data that was available, like from like Reddit, books, and other things, and now people are complaining that you stole our data, our IPs to train your model. And what Kirill said, like, you have access to a lot of data of the companies that use. Is there a request from them to help them with this data and and maybe make this data available for further training or something like that? Or this is something that happens organically because that's how the tool works?
I think a lot of the bigger companies, the ones who are at the top end of scale, tend to be more secure companies, like I said, financial, government, manufacturing companies. So often their data is on their site in their own PuppetDB, and they would kind of only give us access, within support tickets and within the scope of, help they're needing.
Mm-hmm. So it's not like it end up on your servers and you can browse through it.
No. And we have kind of discussed in the past the possibility of kind of creating, models to try and work out kind of typical capacities and things like that, because, there's always, as we're going to those scales, it's actually quite challenging to work out how the infrastructure should be handled, because people write their Puppet code quite differently. Some people gather a lot of facts, which is kind of, you can have Ruby scripts which state, how to gather a piece of information from a box and pull it back. Some people, do a lot of resources. So it's kind of, a lot of customers will say to us, so, how should I configure my infrastructure to support 100,000 nodes? And I'll be like, well, it depends what you're doing. If you're only enforcing a handful of things, then that's a very different setup to if you're installing 100 packages on every box and, configuring a lot of complex commands and templates. So that's been an interesting thing for what we've been thinking about is, how do we kind of create those models of trying to depersonalize some of the data from organizations and say, this is like a typical bank or this is a typical organization of this size, and being then able to say, these are the kind of behaviors we can expect, and this is how you can make your system performant, or even kind of more importantly saying, we can actually see part of your system is very slow in this area, which differs greatly from other organizations. So these things are all things we're still looking at, but there's so much data there. It feels like AI has to be the answer in there when you have that much data.
Not so long ago, there was a case, and we've been discussing it on our podcast several times when the company 37 Signals they migrated from cloud back on premise on the data center. And we were discussing this, and there was like a lot of reasons for them to do that. One of which was financial. Yeah, you mentioned that the bills and the invoices that Kubernetes generates to you can get out of hand pretty quickly, and so they decided to switch to data centers, and it turns that it was a cheaper solution for them. I wanted to ask your take on that, because I think that the area where that you are working in is kind of related to that. And do you think this could be a good case for Puppet when the company as large as 37 Signals decides to migrate from cloud to back to data center or to on-premise, that they can utilize Puppet capabilities for that?
I don't think VMs are ever going to go away. I mean, I think it depends on the workload and your approach. And I think the issue at many organizations was, I saw it personally that you had people kind of get very hyped up that they were going to go public cloud and everything was going to go public cloud. And they even went to the state of having a cloud-first strategy where you had to justify things not going to the cloud. Mm-hmm. And that sort of ignored, well, is the thing we're doing actually suitable for the cloud? Because if you've just got a very simple application that you don't want to migrate, you don't want to change, it's just going to sit on a VM and run and run and run. Does that make sense to go to the cloud if you're going to have to pay for every hour it's up? Or are you pricing it correctly to make sure that if you buy kind of reserved servers from one of the providers, is it cheaper than running it in-house? Because it always depends on your scale and legislation, because there's always going to be some orgs that may find themselves legislated to have some things definitely on their own hardware for whatever reason. I think there's, the Puppet's got opportunities in the cloud and in the private data center or private cloud. When we have that need for compliance and enforcement on virtual machines. But I think, companies just have to be realistic about what they're doing. And, it's always that thing of it. I've found it's often not about the technology, it's about the people and processes. A lot, even when you go back to like going from physical to virtual, a lot of the benefits weren't fully realized because a lot of the bad habits and bad behaviors weren't dropped, so when virtuals first came in, people talked about, hey, we won't have to run things over the weekend if people only use them during the week. But a lot of organizations didn't do that because they didn't trust to bring servers down over the weekend and bring them up at a time. And I feel there's some of that behavior going into the public cloud where the consequence is more serious because you're paying by the hour. I think it's, there's behavioral and process challenges there, and really thinking about, how you're going to do things and is it worth modernizing? Because just because you can do something in Kubernetes or you could do something in a Lambda doesn't mean, you necessarily should. And, balancing how that will affect you, having multiple points of entry.
So I think that you're right, David, sorry, because it's true that not every company can do the same. There are companies like 37 Signal that, okay, they made the numbers and they decided, yes, this is the path and we need to go to the cloud because we're going to save money. But there are, for example, many companies that is a SaaS, that is only a front end with a backend and a database, that for sure, come on, please, it's much, much better to go to a Lambda or Cloud Run in Google Cloud or container app in Azure. You have thousands of options like that. That is only one container with one database, and that's all. So every company is different. But this is the best scenario. And about this kind of tooling, I think that the problem that we have is that these companies, AWS, Google Cloud and Azure, they create a number of tools, and they want you to use that. And they're not telling you how to do that. It's not like, okay, it's use everything that you can because you're going to spend money on that, and I prefer you to do this big amount of money. expenses, and this is the problem with 37 Signals. I think that they discovered that the amount of money that they are, because I've been working with companies that they pay more than 2 or 3 millions per month in cloud. So it's crazy. We're talking about more than 30 millions per year. So, and these invoices, the problem is when you have permissions, you are allowed to see the numbers. And when you see these numbers, you say, what are you telling? So how can you spend more than 2 millions per month in the cloud? And when you see that, you say, no, man, I need to reduce that, because the hard part to reduce money in a company is firing people. This is the more difficult part, because the company is the humans that are working in, because there is no entity called company. It's the people working in the company who made the company. So it's the last thing that you need to do is to fire people. But then when you need to cut cost, if you cut costs by, for example, reducing the number of machines that are up and running because one guy preferred to live there. But it's true that when you move to on-premise, you cannot tell, okay, I want to shutting down this data center during the weekend. You cannot do that because you pay to the security guy all day. You pay for the person who is checking the cables every day. Even on the 25th of December, there should be a person there. So it's true that there are different companies and every company should choose that. But I think that this is good because now I think that we are in the industry mature enough to decide if we can go to on-prem or we can go to cloud. Because there were a moment where everything was on-prem. Now everyone moved to the cloud. Everyone should be in containers. No man, so relax. Now we understand how everything is working after 10 to 15 years. And now we decide, okay, this is a company that should be on-prem. This is a company that should be on cloud. And this is good because then you have tooling for on-cloud, you have tooling for on-prem, and you have tooling for everything. I think this is we are living a moment. But okay, we are living another crazy moment again now with the AI that everyone wants to go in this direction. And then the market, we decide in 10 years or 5, who should be in AI and who shouldn't. The same thing that the people decide who should be in cloud and who shouldn't.
Yeah, I think it's kind of beyond cost as well because, it's very hard to replicate some of the features that Amazon and, Google and Microsoft have. If you look at my traditional background in the bank, trying to make something where you can auto-scale, or truly have data center redundancy to the level you can in the cloud, that's very, very difficult. It's very, very expensive if you're doing it. But on the other hand, if you need that, if that is your primary objective, then absolutely, you probably want to go to the public cloud because, getting the cost of running data centers in multiple locations and being able to replicate it all and have the right technologies, that is a very, very challenging, technical problem. And to have enough capacity to deal with the potential, particularly in the era we're living where things can go very big, very fast, to have that kind of capacity in a private data center is very, very challenging, and you can leave yourself with a lot of things just lying spare. So I think it's that thing of, as I said, it's thinking, what are you trying to achieve and what is the most important thing to you? If it's having that capacity to scale, then that extra cost of what it's taking to do it may be absolutely worth it. But I think it's just making sure people aren't kind of defaulting to public cloud or defaulting to any technology just because everyone else is.
Yes, it does.
Do you guys feel like this is a pendulum case, right? Then one time it's swung to the clouds and now it swings back, or is it swings back or to entirely a different direction today? Like, how do you feel about that, David?
I funnily enough, I'm going to do a presentation tomorrow where I do have a slide saying, are we going backwards? And for me, the answer is no. I feel like, public cloud is certainly growing. Kubernetes is certainly growing. I think just the view that, VMs and, traditional IT would be eliminated, I think that's not going to happen. I think we're kind of coming into a world where, we're going to live with lots of things side by side. And they're all going to have their own place and their own use cases. So public cloud for me is going to keep growing. The containers and Kubernetes use is going to keep growing. But, we still see growth of VMs and private data centers and public data, public cloud with VMs, growing alongside it, just obviously not quite as fast because it's already got such a large grouping. that's where it's hard for organizations, because when you're just trying to convert something, convert all the skills over to one thing, that feels a lot easier and a lot more comfortable. But when you're having to try to manage, multiple platforms, that's a lot harder. And I think that's coming back to kind of earlier point of why bigger organizations lag behind. I think that's the kind of reason why, is because they have to keep all these things going while trying to work out how they're going to do the modernization.
Do you guys share this impression? Like, where are we heading towards? Well, Pablo, I know you think we're heading towards AI, but in general speaking.
But the point is that there is no other way these days, because there is a race these days, and you see what happened last days with Sandilands. So one guy was fired.
Oh my God!
And one of the biggest, if not the biggest, company in the market these days, I think is the number 3 in the market. So the third or the fourth biggest company in the planet Earth lose in 1 second 2% of the value of the company only because one guy that is not in this company was fired. That at the end they have to hire him, and now they are going to go up because at the end Microsoft acquired for free, let's say OpenAI. But so what I mean is that there is no other way, because if you have a competitor doing something in one way and you're not doing it in this way, this competitor is changing the core business, introducing something new to this core business where you are not introducing this new thing in the core business. So now you're not making coffee, you're making coffee with AI. So you're selling a smart coffee, and and then you change your core business. That is, I am not doing coffee, I'm doing smart coffee. The competitors are doing coffee, but you do a smart coffee. What do you prefer? Coffee or smart coffee? Of course, I prefer smart coffee. I will go and will make a queue to drink this smart coffee because it tastes better. So everything is going to change in this way. There is no other way, because you only need to open wherever news or newspaper or go to wherever everyone is talking about something that is not something that could happen, it's something that is happening. And if you are not able to change the core of your business introducing this new thing, you're going to be out of the business.
I feel like the speed at which we should adapt is constantly increasing. I remember 10 years ago or so, there was a case in my practice where when I applied to a tax office for tax management and other things, so they required from me to send them all the information, all the papers with this floppy disk, 144 inches. And it was 10 years ago or so. And that was because they still has these old computers in their office, and that was the only way for them to accept data from us, from their clients. And I was quite shocked. Okay, maybe not 10 years, like 12 or 13 years ago, something like that. But still, I was quite shocked that there are companies that still use these floppy disks. And now that 10 years ago, we were all in cloud, and we had to adapt. And we adapted, and not everybody adapted just yet. And we have to create new solutions to be able to live with that when one people are in the new era and other people are still in the previous era. And then suddenly we will have to adapt again, but this time in a much more faster and quicker pace than before. This is kind of scary to me. And I'm not entirely sure that everybody will be able to adapt. And this time is much more scary and crucial than when it was cloud. Then we switched from virtual machine to clouds. And I think the way how the market will change in a few years will be much more drastic than when the clouds were introduced.
It's different, Leo, because it's different concept, because one concept is aligned with the other, because even today we have on-prem and on-prem, we have a cloud and on-prem, and this is something different, because This is like Shakespeare, no? To be or not to be. So it was Hamlet, sorry. Okay, Shakespeare who wrote that, but it's Hamlet in the play.
Yeah,
So, but it's like that, Is you are there or you are not there, and will happen in the next years.
Okay.
I feel like it's a whole scale thing again. When we're talking about why did Puppet come into being, it was because people just had too much complexity, too many servers,
Sadly.
too much to deal with. And, now when you're seeing AI coming in, it's answering that thing of, well, we've got, configuration management answered one question, public cloud answered another question around scale. Kubernetes and containers continue to answer that question. And AI is coming at that point of, as we've grown and grown and grown, the data and, all the information we have has continued to grow and grow and grow. And there's just no way for people to process that.
Exactly.
And that's where AI is slotting in and, becoming that next revolution everyone needs to make. Because if you don't, you just won't be able to process information in the way other people can.
But the problematic part for me is not that, because for me the problematic part is imagine a new tool in 1 year or half year or 2 years that is able to deploy all the infra, but without you, David, without me. It's a tool that is able to make their own code, that is able to deploy the infra that is needed, and is able to take their own decisions. So, and this tool is able to create and destroy wherever a component that is needed automatically. And this is not far away in the time, because we have the knowledge, we know how, because this is something that we are doing currently, and we know the metrics, why something should be up and down, and why should I create some new components or destroy. And with a single command in an NLP, through an LLM, so a large model, then I can create something like that and create the whole environment. So, and I can destroy. And this is something that could appear in months. I had to imagine that there should be companies working on that currently.
Exactly.
And this is what I mean with a game changer, because then is when you introduce AI inside the core of the business, or you have this AI like something that I use sometimes, because when you change the way that you deploy the infra in this way is when you says, wow. So even I can reduce the number of operators, the number of DevOps guys, the number of developers. I can reduce of these people, and then I can save costs.
Every time it's tended to happen, there's always been a fear that, configuration management would reduce the number of people you need. Public cloud would reduce the number of people you need, and it's kind of never happened. And I always feel like people often assume that because you get something that can eliminate this toil, that that will result in people being lost. But it tends to just result in more things being able to be done, and it's always hard to predict. What will that allow us to do and allow us to create, because we've got this. This thing I used to have to do has been taken away from me. That goes right back. I was reading Safely to Earth, which was one of the NASA people who worked on the kind of ground teams and things, who talked about when he was first asking for to be upgraded from tape readers to terminals so he could enter data quicker. That he was immediately asked, how many people can I get rid of? And that hadn't been his assumption. He was assuming, well, I'll be able to do other things. And I always think that's the kind of what really comes of these things, is that we just keep growing and growing the capabilities rather than generally losing people. Although, it's always hard to know when it will affect jobs, or, if people have to move jobs.
Yeah. To sum it up, the configuration management will not going anywhere. I mean, obviously it's going somewhere. I mean, it's not gone, and it will stay with us. But the way how it works might change. But because we still use hardware and we still need it for all the tools, for all that we basically, artificial intelligence will still run on the same computers, same hardware, and it's still need to be managed. And for that reason, the configuration management will stay with us. And the people who do this and the application that help us doing this will stay with us. And I think this is good. So basically, your job is secured, David. Okay, I want to thank you for joining this episode with us. It was very entertaining for me, at least. I hope those who listens to us learned something new today. And I want to once again remind you that the best way to keep up with everything that happens inside mkdev and outside is to be subscribed to our bi-weekly mkdev dispatch newsletter. The link in the description. Also, I want to remind you about our mkdev store, a store where you can order beautiful merchandise, t-shirts, mugs with our illustrations and awesome prints. That's about it. Thank you, David, for joining in.
Thank you.
And thank you, Pablo, Kirill. It was a great episode. Bye, everyone.
Do you think your project infrastructure is well set and maintained? We know for sure there is always room for improvement. If you are uncertain where to begin, let's first do an audit of what you already have. We will review your setup from every angle: performance, cost, security, high availability, and automation, and provide you with a detailed roadmap of which direction your infrastructure should go, generate concrete tasks for you to implement, or even take on your infra entirely, if you let us, of course.